Hello, and welcome to the Growing Your Revenue Management Capabilities as the Industry Evolves webinar, presented by Paul Van Mierendonk. Paul Van Mierendonk is the Senior Manager of our Advisory Services here at Ideas Revenue Solutions. With over 15 years of experience in the hospitality industry, Paul has successfully led several high-profile advisory projects, has been a guest speaker at numerous industry events, and regularly conducts global webinars on revenue management and pricing topics. Paul's aimed at helping properties all over the world ensure property performance and return on investment through interaction with and auditing hotel management. Please take a moment to respond to our poll question regarding where you currently assess your revenue management capabilities. Paul plans to use this feedback throughout his presentation today. If you have any questions, please submit them in the question box and we will do our best to answer at the end of the webinar. There will be an optional 10-minute demonstration at the end of the webinar showing you what we talked about today and how it applies to an automated revenue management solution. Thank you for joining us on the webinar. I will make sure to provide everyone with a recording of the webinar as a follow-up. With that, I would like to pass it off to Paul.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you, everyone, and for joining the call this morning, evening, or middle of the day, wherever you may be. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how you might be able to grow your capabilities as the industry continues to evolve. And just to kick us off, you will have seen the poll there on the right-hand side of the screen, which is open. If you can just take 1 minute to complete that, what we're looking for is how do you think your organization is when it comes to revenue performance? So really, where do you think you are on this, in terms of your development in your revenue management capabilities? So are you just aspiring to apply revenue management, or do you have a desire to change and to become more than you are today if you're just starting out? Or are you revenue aware and you're actually going through some transformation at the moment? Or are you revenue informed and do you actually see concrete improvements happening in your organization when it comes to revenue management? Or are you the next level up, which is really revenue confident, and does revenue management really have a seat at the table and influence the organization? Or are you revenue innovative? That's really the end game. Are you trying to get to a situation where you're empowering the entire organization to take control of revenue management? So we're going to close the poll now, so please just put in your answers quickly, and we're going to kind of close that poll in a second there. Callan, I'm not sure if you're able to close that off there. I think it's ended here. So we'll just wait for those results to come back. And as we do that, I think I'll just jump to the next slide here. As many of you are probably aware, we're at sort of a junction here in terms of not only, the economy and obviously in many of your hotels, hopefully you're seeing some rebound in business. It's not the case everywhere, but in a lot of situations and markets that you're in, you may have seen an improvement in performance happening. And really what we're trying to look at today is how can you in your revenue management approach make sure that you're implementing the right processes or right tactics or right strategies that are going to take advantage of that. And what are the things that you need to be thinking about, and are there any ideas that we can maybe share on the call today that are going to help you on that process? So on the right there, I see that the results have come back from the poll here, and many of you have said no answer, which is not surprising because this is a new topic maybe to all of you. And some of you have said you're revenue confident. About 11% or so, 20% of you have said that you're revenue confident. And that really means that you feel pretty good about where you are in terms of revenue management and in terms of your development. And then it's about evenly split, 10, 15% across the other areas there. So really, hopefully through this webinar today, you'll get a clearer picture of what we're talking about here. And I'll see if we can do a poll at the end of the session today as well and see if you can answer the poll, or perhaps you maybe have changed your thoughts about where you're positioned. Of course, we all know the basics of revenue management. I think many of you are during the call probably had some exposure to revenue management at some point, or have been doing some research, or have been doing revenue management for many years, and you will have known about the right product, right customer, right time, right price, and the right channel. And those have been the foundation of revenue management for a long time. But are they still valid? Are they still things that we can apply today? And are there things that we need to be thinking about that don't fall into these categories here? Well, things are changing. Obviously, many of you will be aware of things that are happening in the industry. All the changes online and social media and the things like TripAdvisor, where review scores become increasingly important, Google Hotel Finder and related applications that make it so much easier for guests to compare hotels and prices in certain locations, and same with Trivago, which allows you to compare different channels. And of course, the whole best rate guarantee, which has been with us for a number of years now, is under fire or being questioned. And in several different regions across the world, there's questions about should this change or not, and are laws coming into place to address that or not. So lots of changes happening there. And then things like Airbnb just shaking up the market there and adding a whole new approach to hospitality there, which is really showing quite a bit of success in that area that they're approaching there. And of course, mobile, influencing a lot of decision making, and not only for the clients and guests that are staying in our hotels, but also for revenue management. Having mobile revenue management applications and so forth gives us that added flexibility to make decisions and look at our data in different ways. So things are changing. So what do we need to do to be successful? Well, we very strongly believe that, in order to be successful, you really need to be innovative. You need to be able to try new things and try new approaches in order to take advantage of the changes that are happening in the market. So what is happening out there? Well, if we just consider change for a moment and think about, the hotel industry is fairly old, and as are things like watches that have been around for hundreds of years. But, we're seeing a little bit of a breakthrough now, as many of you, have followed this year or the last couple of years, some of the technology that's making its way to watches. That's a real leap in a product that's been around for hundreds of years, really. And only now is seeing a change into something quite significant that's going to change the way we use that little piece of technology on our wrists completely. So that's definitely a sign of innovation, and I think moving away from things that have been the same for hundreds of years now into something that's completely different. So that's an exciting area to keep an eye on in terms of innovation. What about the hotel industry? Well, we've also been around for hundreds of years, and the thing in revenue management, especially if we want to think about, not just hotels, but in revenue management, we used to have rack rates, many, many years ago. And, this is not a picture from 1915. I couldn't find one of those, unfortunately. But but there are still rack rates out there, as you can see here. And, it is something that is changing. So where are we going now? We've obviously moved beyond rack rates and gone to new things and different changes. But where are we today, and where are we headed in the future? And, of course, it's a very interesting question that there are multiple answers there. But let's start by looking back at the evolution of revenue management. So what has really happened to date? And hotels have been around since forever almost, and putting prices out there in a systematic way, maybe for 100 years or so. But really, revenue management has only taken off since the late 80s. So kind of cascading down from the airline industry, where most of it started out, hotels started to do demand forecasting and have length of stay controls in place already as early as the late 80s, 89. So it was 25 years ago, revenue management started to really take a hold and look at new ways to manage our business and our prices and our inventory. In the 2000s, so 2000s or about 2010, really started to take the concepts of yield management started to take hold, dynamic pricing and competitive rate shopping, with all the the tools that became available and the internet and so forth, that changed a lot in terms of how we price and the transparency in the market as well. Then, of course, today there are some new topics coming along, big data and analytics. You'll hear a lot of that being talked about in the industry. You know, the new channels that are out there are providing guests with a way to look at different hotels and get that reputation impact on our pricing approach as well that we need to take into consideration. And things are moving beyond rooms, and some hotel groups and hotel companies are moving towards more and more revenue management outside of rooms, and meetings and events being a prime example, but other things like F&B as well. So obviously changes are happening, and they're happening faster and faster as we go. So how do we stay on top of that? And maybe let's take a look at some of those innovations that are happening and see if there's things that you are doing at the moment when it comes to being innovative in revenue management, or whether you need to look into some of these topics in more detail. So the first is, I mentioned earlier, they're big data and analytics. So, you know, the more technology savvy our guests become, and us as hotel companies as well, and suppliers to hotel companies, as the technology improves, so does the amount of data that is being generated. So that, of course, offers both challenges and opportunities. But from a revenue management perspective, what we're really trying to do here is look at how can this data that we now have available support the work that we do in revenue management and help make our decisions more accurate, right? So rather than just basing it on ad hoc pieces of information that we may have collected throughout, you know, our experience working in hotels or what we've seen, it's really using that data in a consistent and methodological way to approach it in such a way that it will help us become that much more accurate. And that is ultimately going to help us to drive more revenues, because we're going to make those decisions that are going to have the biggest impact on our performance. So what is an example of analytics? Some of you may be new to the terminology, and some of you may be quite familiar with it, but it's really about trying to apply an analysis to the data that's going to deliver some results that you can use in your decision making. Now, a good example of that is something which we call demand as a function of price. So if we take the data from a hotel and look historically at, you know, if you were charging a certain price and you put that price out in the market, you were getting a certain number of rooms sold at that particular price point. Whatever the reason may be, you know, you are influencing that demand because of the price you have out in the market. So if you look at this very simplified example here, you can see if I charge $0 here and my hotel has 100 rooms, then I'm going to be probably full, and I'm going to sell those 100 rooms quite easily because everyone wants to stay at the hotel for free. Let's assume that is the case, which is great. But of course, if I charge $0, I'm not going to make any revenue. So that's not going to really help me much. Of course, if I start increasing the price, I can see, if I look back in the data historically what's happened, I can see that when I charge $40, my demand drops a little bit. So I went from 100 to being completely sold out to selling a little bit less at 60. But obviously, I started to make revenue here. I made $2,400. And as I continued to increase my price, I saw the demand drop off here. So when I went to 60, it dropped to 40. And when I went to 100, I just became far too expensive and I had no demand. So I can plot these types of data points on a graph, as you can see on the left here that we've done. And those data points of $40, $60, and $100 and $0 have given me what we call a price elasticity curve, or a curve that shows us the relationship between price and demand. And the slope of that curve will tell us, you know, whether the demand is elastic or inelastic. Now, that starts to get a little bit complicated, but when I start to look at that curve and use that in a more practical way, I can probably assume that there is some price point in here that's going to deliver for me the optimal amount of revenue. And when you look on the right there, the graph we've created there, you can see that at $50, which is actually a price point we don't have at the moment or haven't sold historically, but I can see there that I can now sell $50, and based on the demand patterns we've seen historically, I can see that I can probably generate more revenue if I sell my rooms at $50. Now, this is a very simplified example, and obviously it gets a bit more complicated than this. You know, the curve there on the left is not straight always, and it changes over time and day of the week and seasons. So there's a lot of complexities there that comes into this type of using analytics in this type of way. But you can see how it might work and how it may help us to find an optimal price point, as it does in this example, that's going to bring us an increase in revenue. So here, just by getting that price right, I just made 4% more revenue, or $100 in this particular example. So using analytics to make decisions on price and inventory can really help us to generate a lot of revenues for the future if we look at and analyze the data that we have available. So that's a little bit about applying analytics. And like I said, this is a very simplified example, but you can imagine if you start to extrapolate out a lot of this and start to add in the various complexities, how powerful this can be. Now, I mentioned earlier there's something happening in the market with reputation. Now, you're all very much aware of things like TripAdvisor and those types of review sites that are out there. And really what that sheds a lot of light on is what's already been around for a long time, which is that value perception equation. And that's really where you think about a customer and how they choose the hotel that they want to stay in. They look at how much it's going to cost them and what is the benefit that they get from staying at your hotel versus the competitor, for example. So customers have been making those types of decisions already for hundreds of years as they look at places where they would like to stay and making their choices in their preferred hotels. So that customer value proposition becomes very important when we think about the online reputation that you have as a hotel. Now, a lot of research has been done into what is the impact of this on pricing, and is there something we can do with our reputation scores that allow us to take the right decisions in terms of price and availability, so those revenue management decisions. Expedia has done a study and has shown in that study that those hotels that have a high score in guest comments or guest reviews have on average achieved a 9% higher average rate. So definitely, there is a correlation there between high scores and the hotel's ability to achieve a higher average rate. Now, that's just one example, and it's maybe skewed by a particular channel or segment of the market. But more studies have been done. It's not just the one study there. If you look at what Cornell University has done together with Review Pro, they did a study, I believe it was late last year, that looked into the correlation there between review scores and RevPAR. And again, they saw that as a hotel increases its reputation score, in this case by 1 point, that equated to a 1.4% increase in RevPAR. So as the hotel was improving its review scores, it saw there was a definite correlation there between the improvement in RevPAR. So it's a very strong message there about that correlation again, and sort of confirms what Expedia was highlighting there as well, in a more dynamic way where actually that change has been measured and not just the static position of those hotels. And then lastly there, SAS, our parent company, and Pennsylvania State University did a study there, and definitely they have also identified a strong relationship between price, rating, and review quality. So this just tells us that we need to very much focus on keeping an eye on what is our reputation and how we're pricing against that. Now, a way to do that is to compare price versus reputation and plotting those points on a graph. Now, this is an example of how that's done here, and you'll get some more details on this later, I believe. But here's an example where you can see that plotting your hotel against and how your hotel is priced versus what reputation scores it has against the competitors allows you to understand, am I underpriced potentially, or am I overpriced, or how am I positioned in the market, and how can I best take advantage of that? Is there an opportunity for me to maybe charge a little bit more versus my competitive set, or do I need to lower my price a little bit to take advantage of the scores that I have and in relation to competitors that are out there? So using reputation pricing is becoming something more and more established in the market, so something definitely to think about. Then lastly, going beyond rooms. So revenue management should not be limited to just the room side. If we look at the basic concept of revenue management, it's about managing the space that we have available in our hotels or in our locations, the guests that are generating that revenue or that demand coming into our hotels, and the time period that they're staying in our hotels, whether it be one night or whether it be multiple nights. So on the room side, that's very easy. We have hotel rooms, we have guests staying in our rooms, and they stay one or more nights in our hotel. When we start going beyond rooms, we need to be looking at things like our meeting room utilization. So we don't just have bedrooms in our hotels, we also have function space or meeting rooms. So how much of that space do we have available for sale, and how much of it is occupied on any given day? And when we start looking at the guest aspect, what is the revenue those guests are bringing into our hotel on a total revenue basis? And not just the revenue, but what is the profit I'm getting from those particular guests? And do we need to look more granular than just by day? So on the room side, it's quite easy. It's one night. That's usually the minimum that hotel guests can stay. But when we start to go up beyond rooms, we need to start splitting that down into potentially smaller pieces. So think about maybe hours in restaurants or day parts and function space. So we add some complexity to that equation, but the same principles of revenue management still apply. And if you want to innovate in revenue management, you really need to start looking at that next level beyond rooms. How do you start doing that? Think about the KPIs. So function space, for example, what are the key performance indicators there that we need to look at? Well, they're actually very similar to rooms. We want to look at function space utilization. How much of our space is being utilized? What percentage can I equate to that? RevPAR, again, in function space, like I said earlier, profit is starting to become more important when we start going outside of rooms, because profit tends to be very big on the room side, but a little bit smaller on some of the other areas of the hotel. So in function space, for example, or our meeting rooms, we want to look at what is the profit per available space, rather than just the revenue per available room or space. So profit becomes more important, and not just available space, but also occupied space. And those compare across to the room side with RevPAR and average daily rate. On the function space, we have now metrics such as ProPass, profit per available space, time, essentially day parts, and we have profit per occupied space, time, which is ProPost. So those are metrics that you need to be looking at if you're starting to go beyond rooms into things like function space. But it's not easy. If you start thinking about all the complexities that are involved in trying any type of innovation, it gets more complicated than just implementing existing practices or standards. We need to start thinking about how are we collecting the data that's out there for this particular thing that we're looking at, or how are we analyzing the data that's out there? Are we making use of the right tools and approaching it in the right way? Are we forecasting, which is an essential part of revenue management? Are we forecasting what we're doing, and are we managing that space effectively and then pricing it in the right way, and how are we reporting it? So that cycle here is an example for function space that we've called out here. This process applies really to any innovation that you undertake. Is, do you have those pieces in place to be able to do this? And how do you go about starting something like this and assessing whether you're able to get into these types of innovative approaches to revenue management that are coming on the horizon? Well, this is where we get back to our poll. So let me explain a little bit more about how we think about this in ideas when we deal with our clients. So really, do you have revenue aspirations? Are you just starting out? And when you think about the things I've just mentioned earlier, you just starting out here in revenue management, and are you still, starting to approach dynamic pricing and yield management and demand forecasting, which are really the basics of revenue management? Or have you already implemented? Are you revenue aware, and are you at a stage where you've really solidified that, the start of that, and you're aware that this is going to have an impact on your organization? Or have you made those changes, and are you recognizing those improvements, and have you implemented everything that you've wanted to? Or do you have a seat at the table when it comes to the executive team? Are you influencing your organization, and are you confident revenue management is making a difference for your business? Or lastly, are you innovative? Are you doing things like function-based revenue management or reputation pricing or any analytics? Are you applying analytics to your revenue management practice in a sophisticated way, and starting out with, for example, the simple example that I outlined there? Where do you sit on this chart here? And I'll ask Callan maybe to open up the poll as I wrap up here. If you can all have another look at the poll here and think about that over the next few minutes as I continue through this presentation. So how do you innovate? So as you're thinking about where you are positioned on that chart, how do you get to the next level? If you are revenue aware, what do you need to do to become revenue informed? Or even further up the capabilities chart there. But you need to think about the people side, you need to think about the process side, and you need to think about the technology side. It's not just one of those elements. It's really how do you address each of those in order to be effective. And we've seen throughout our engagement with over 7,000 hotels now that really those hotels that are successful in adopting new innovations in revenue management have addressed the people side and made sure that the right people are in place, that they're educated and they have the right training and the right skills. The processes are in place that happen day to day, making sure the data is correct and analyzed in the right way, and having that technology and infrastructure in place to really bring it up to the next level. So as you think about where you're going maybe for next year or beyond, try to think about where are you today? How are your people in your organization or your hotel or a hotel group, and are they at the level where you want them to be? And how about the processes? And have you thought about the next technology innovations that are out there in the market, and are you taking advantage of those? And what is your plan for 2016, and where do you want to go in the long term? And what are the specific points underneath each of these that you need to address moving forward? So as we start getting to the end of this, if you just want to wrap up, we're going to wrap up the poll there. So as a takeaway, really start thinking about how are you going to move to that next level. Hopefully all of you are coming towards the time of the year where you're going to be empowered to make some decisions about where you can move in the short term or the long term, but hopefully it is going in the right direction upwards in that revenue management capability assessment. Wow, I think I've shocked you all with my my assessment chart there, and I've got no answers there as being the big return there, 60%. So I guess that means many of you are pretty unsure where you are at the moment in terms of which level you should be at or you're maybe at the moment. But again, that revenue confident level seems to be the one that's sticking out with around 16%. So many of you that have responded there and knew the answer there have replied that you're confident in your revenue management capabilities at the moment. So if that's the case, then, if many of you are still unsure, now's the time to start really looking into that and think about some of the things we talked about today and what you can do different next year or for the long term. And with that, I think we're going to end this part of the session today. And I don't know, Callan, if there were any questions or anything that we need to address at this stage?
Yes. Thank you, Paul. One question that we did have come through was how do you actually go about pricing using analytics? The example shown seems to be theoretical. Is it really possible?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the example there was sort of a very static example and very conceptual about, straight line, change. But what you can do as a hotel is really look back and start collecting data on how you've priced and what has been the number of rooms sold or the demand at that particular price. So if you take, for example, all your Thursdays for the past year, if you take, a certain day of the week and kind of focus on that, and take, for example, a Thursday and look at, well, at what price point, how many rooms did you sell? So at $100, how many rooms did you sell? And when you had a rate of $120, how many rooms did you sell? And when you start collecting all that data and looking at it, you'll see those patterns start to come across, which are similar to the one I showed in the graph there. So it's definitely possible to do this in a manual environment, or if you are more advanced or you have some of the right technology there. This is actually what happens in an automated fashion when you think about price optimization or finding that perfect price point, making the right pricing decision in some of those automated tools.
Okay, great. And then another question that we've had a couple come through, the next question that's up is, how do I convince my owner that we need to develop further? So looking at revenue aspirations in the chart, how do you get your owner on board?
I think the key there is, we're very strong believers in kind of crawl, walk, run approach. So, try and show them, how small changes can make a big difference or have a big impact. So things like, applying different prices, different days of the week is a great starting point if that's where you're starting at the moment. If you're further along and you're looking at, can analytics apply or can we use things like reputation pricing, these are things that are being done at some of the larger hotel groups or hotels that have really switched on to being innovative in revenue management and really taking it head on. So there are some great examples and case studies out there of hotels that have done revenue management in this way and applied some of these new things that have really shown a return on investment. And revenue management delivers results, and it's been proven time and time again. So, start small and make a few changes and apply some of the ideas and concepts, and you'll see a return come through. And that's a great way to start out to convincing somebody about the power of revenue management. And then moving on from there, look at, what have other hotels done in the industry and what are the successes they've had in doing similar things.
Okay, great. Thank you. I passed it off to Sam to kick us off with the demonstration part. We do have a couple more questions coming through, so we'll make sure to follow up with you offline or circle back around to them after Sam does his demonstration. Sam?
Thanks, Kellen. So a lot of the subjects that Paul talked about this morning, we want to talk about their application when it comes to revenue management software. So today I'm going to walk through a couple of the key concepts that Paul talked about, being applying analytics to pricing your hotel, the influence of reputation on your price, as well as moving beyond rooms into function space as an example. So the first area I wanted to talk about was really applying analytics to your pricing scenarios. So Paul talked about a lot of the influences of demand and price and them being a function of each other. And that really is part and parcel to the way that Ideas thinks about pricing your hotel when it comes to software. So the large amounts of data that software can take in, of course, allow it to get more and more complex. So, of course, when you're manually applying these analytics, you have certain limitations about the number of data and the amount of data that you can take in and the patterns that you can establish. When the software is looking at this, we can become very complex and do things such as bar by length of stay, which in this case on the screen here, its application, the system is creating 3 different bar decisions for essentially 8 lengths of stay. So you can see length of stay 1, 2, 3, and 4 at the top of the screen there. And the system for each arrival date and length of stay has created an optimized set of bar rates. We can see here that it's created 3 bar rates on the screen, a system bar, a web bar, and a reputation bar. We'll talk a little bit more about reputation bar when it comes to our second section here. But we can see that the system is actually taking in different pieces of data and analyzing them in a much more complex manner. So it can take into account things like demand as a function of price at each arrival date and length of stay based on some finite forecast that it's creating, and also things like looking at the optimal price points, very similar to the way that Paul talked about in his simplistic graphs. Granted, we understand, even based on the questions, that those graphs can be quite complex at certain points. The systems can also start to factor in things like price elasticity that we mentioned earlier. So there are a lot of influence that can go into creating some of these more complex pricing decisions. So as a hotel moving higher and higher on that chart all the way up to revenue innovative, you might start looking at how can I apply analytics into my pricing, either using software to do something more complex to a reputation impacted bar by length of stay, or even starting simpler if you're one of the participants who answered maybe that you're still moving up the chart. There's also other factors, including competitor rate data, things that create the web impacted bar rate that we're seeing on the screen here. And also, the system has the ability, these RMS systems have the ability to create things like hurdle rates. And in combination with the bar rates and hurdle rates, the RMS systems are able to control inventory and price in a much more granular fashion, perhaps, than a human being could do with, simple Excel-based tools, as an example. So there's a lot of different types of analytics we can look at applying to pricing, whether it be manually or through an RMS system. Moving on to one of Paul's later topics, which is the reputation impact on our pricing. There are multiple different ways that RMS systems can take this data in, and one of the most simplistic ways is simply to visualize that data when it comes to how your price and hotels' KPIs react to reputation changes. So the reputation pricing quadrant that Paul showed on the screen here as an example can help graph your hotel's reputation as well as your competitors' reputation scores against the prices and achieved competitive prices for a historical period in time, as an example, or a future-looking period. So a lot of those types of influence can go into how your hotel should be priced against its comp set. Not only should we take into account their competitive rates to make sure that you're maintaining competition in your particular market, but also how those hotels compare when it comes to reputation scores. Also, simple analysis of reputation scores in comparison to KPIs like occupancy and ADR can help refine the methods in which your hotels find patterns to understand whether your price has an effect on your reputation scores or vice versa, if they're a function of one another. You can start to identify patterns when you start to analyze these functions of the reputation score and pricing analytics. So moving beyond what we talked about even in the previous example, starting to graph things like RevPAR and ADR and occupancy against your, for perhaps year-over-year reputation scores can lead towards creating a reputation-impacted bar rate, as an example. So you might decide to make changes to your bar rates based on how your reputation is impacting them. Of course, in an automated RMS system, you're looking at, can the system automate those changes to increase my bar rate when I have pricing opportunities? So ideas through the reputation impacted bar module here can make a separate recommendation to the bar rates, enhancing those to perhaps on certain opportunity dates take advantage of your hotel's optimal pricing configuration. So I can sort as an example and filter here to find the dates that the reputation bar or that the idea system is suggesting to increase the bar based on reputation scores. That helps your customers in understanding, placing your hotel in the feet of your customers to say, let's measure the costs and benefits and ensure that we're pricing ourselves competitively against our comp set. And for the last topic, we're going to talk about function-based revenue management. So moving beyond rooms, as Paul talked about, looking at the other areas of your hotel that we can apply revenue management practices to, we're still applying the basics of revenue management, the right price, the right time, and the right products to the right customer. So function-based is a natural evolution of your hotel's revenue management practices, and another area that RMS systems can help enhance your capabilities. So by taking information from a sales and catering system about groups and about historical achievements, we can start to come up with those KPIs and track those KPIs historically to understand and create the foundation of revenue management, which is a forecast. So looking even at something simple like a demand calendar for function space, which I have on the screen here, we can see we have high and low demand days for our function space at this particular demo hotel, and we're able to evaluate things like a utilization forecast, forecasting into the future what our utilization is expected to be, so that we can make proactive decisions about what the optimal groups to sell function space are. And also looking at the impact of things like special events on our function space. So there are multiple different ways that RMS systems can help factor in both the revenue and profit of your function space, both historically and future looking, to help make better informed decisions as a hotel about what the right pieces of business are and the right products at the right time. That's going to wrap up what I wanted to talk about today when it comes to the applications of those three areas within Ideas RMS. Of course, there's plenty of features I didn't talk about on today's call, and I'll hand it back to Callan to see if we have any questions.
Great, thank you, Sam. I think we were able to sort out and answer all of the questions offline. I am going to go ahead and thank you and Paul for participating today and putting together such a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I will make sure to send out the recording and the slides to everyone by the end of the week here. And have a great week, and we'll see you at the next webinar.